Szeretettel köszöntöm a képernyők előtt helyet foglaló kedves közönségünket. Ez itt a Liszt Ferenc Kamarazenekar videós podcast sorozata. Tóth Endre vagyok. Tudom, már egy jó ideje nem jelentkeztünk videós interjúkkal, de csak azért, hogy egy kicsit erőt gyűjtsünk, és most izgalmasabbnál izgalmasabb vendégművészekkel beszélgethessünk, hiszen idén 60. fennállásának 60. évfordulóját ünnepli a Liszt Ferenc Kamarazenekar, és ezt nekünk is meg kell ünnepelnünk. Izgalmasabbnál izgalmasabb vendégművészek lesznek idén, amint említettem, így ebben a podcast sorozatban is. Első vendégemet szerintem a koncertlátogatóknak legalábbis a nevét nem kell bemutatnom, hiszen nagyon jól ismerik, ugyanis több mint negyedszázada jelen van már a Liszt Ferenc Kamarazenekar életében a svájci-francia fuvolaművész Emmanuel Pahud, akit elsősorban a Liszt Ferenc Kamarazenekarral közös emlékeiről kérdezek. I warmly welcome you and thank you for accepting our invitation to this talk. And when we are recording our interview, you have just arrived for the second rehearsal with the Franz Liszt Chamber Orchestra. But of course, this is not your first time you play together. And actually, we did some research, and I have to admit that we couldn't count all the performances you played together. The earliest record I found in a magazine was a concert in 1997 in Sárospatak at Zemplén Art Days, Zemplén Festival. Then you played together with harp player Margit Anna Schellenberger and the oboist Hans-Jörg Schellenberger. Do you remember this concert, and could this really be the first time?
Yes, it goes back to the 20th century, to last century actually, in the first collaboration. It was actually our first concert in Hungary together, in Sárospatak, in the summer festival, in the summer home of the Franz Liszt Chamber Orchestra in the beautiful inner courtyard of the castle, and it reminded me very much of my own festival in southern France, which I had just founded for chamber music in a smaller kind of open courtyard inside a castle like this. So it was for me a great cultural shock, of course, to discover, to go abroad, to be together, live together really, with the members of the Franz Liszt Chamber Orchestra. We had been on tour just the year before in Germany, throughout Germany, and this is how we had our first collaboration. So this is very fond memories, and I actually do have very much part of this trip still in my heart, because it was really a very special period. Also, it was for me, in the same time, I was so happy to spend time and make music, but my first son was just born a few months before, so my heart was also broken to leave the family behind, as we had been spending the whole summer together before that. But the music is healing, as you know.
Yeah, and what is it like to work together with the Franz Liszt Chamber Orchestra? I think it's good because you are a frequent guest of the orchestra.
Yes, now it's been really over 25 years of collaboration, and which is nearly half of the life of the Franz Liszt Chamber Orchestra, which was familiar. I was familiar with as a student already because of the collaboration with great masters like Jean-Pierre Rampal, Maurice André, so many French virtuosos, and the extensive touring that the Franz Liszt Chamber Orchestra did in that time with those amazing soloists. And those collaborations were really something special under the leadership of János Rolla, of course, who was, I remember, a very determined person in the reading of the music, and I learned so much as a young musician, joining and having the first rehearsals with some Mozart concerto, with some Bach suites. You know, coming from France, I had no real tradition about the performance of Middle European music, so I was learning a lot together actually with the Franz Liszt Chamber Orchestra.
There were a lot of changes during the last 10 years. In 2013, this building, this institution, the Liszt Academy, where you played the most concerts together with the Franz Liszt Chamber Orchestra, was renewed. And then in 2016 there was a change in the life of the orchestra, because before that János Rolla was the leader of the orchestra, and after that Péter Twirst became the concertmaster. And of course the orchestra has a lot of young members now, and in 2020 István Várdai became the artistic director. As a guest artist, how do you see all of these changes, these renewals?
Well, yes, it has been indeed a smooth transition from, it now looks like a different orchestra. And I remember, people like Peter, for example, his father was playing in the orchestra, and he was joining as a student, basically growing into this. And to see such generation change, handing over within a school, within a family even, is something very moving. And I find really touching. And the years going by, of course, the integration of new musicians in different desks means that the whole founders generation has now been replaced. And the spirits in a changing world, because we had we could say in the history of the orchestra, you had like 35 years without internet. And now the last 25 years in a period of a very different Europe. First of all, and so the touring possibilities became very different also. The communication possibility, the collaboration with different artists, and the stylistical approach of a various repertoire also has been now under the leadership of István Várdai, also expanding to a lot more of transcriptions, expanding the repertoire. And the focus is changing. It's something that I can witness in other orchestras, like in my orchestra where I have my day job in Berlin Philharmonic. I joined a band that was just starting with Claudio Abbado, expanding the range of repertoire very much compared to the focus of Karajan. And then with Simon Rattle, it went really even much bigger in the change of repertoire. Now with the Petrenko, we focus on a different period, different style. So there we go. The artistic leadership and the collaboration is something that evolves with the time. It's organic in making music, and it's something very natural and very welcome. And I must say, with a small group like Franz Liszt Chamber Orchestra, it means also implication of every single member in the orchestra, which is beautiful to witness.
What were the most memorable experiences and moments of the last quarter of a century for you?
Yeah, a quarter of a century of collaborations is really something quite special. And of course, if we go beyond the routine, if I may say, of the German-Austrian tours, which we did quite a lot of these, every one of my visits to Hungary has been really made be the first one to Sarospatak, but then later on at the old Franz Liszt Academy, then at MUPA, and then again in the renewed Academy Hall. But also the South America tour, for example, being in Buenos Aires or in São Paulo, and all these different, with really traveling together, you get to know each other better. And then we had these special tours where we had birthday celebration together, and they started playing some folk music also together in the restaurant. And this is really something that create bonds together with such a bunch of gifted musicians like Franz Liszt Chamber Orchestra. And those are fond memories for me. When I look backwards, I don't have so much time to look back at what I did before, because I'm always full of projects and thinking now about today's performance, about this week's planning, and about the planning in 2025, in 2 years, 3 years. But these special moments where there's just like touching melodies and harmonies happening in this music. When we played as an encore Libertango in Buenos Aires, for example, it was a moment where in the Teatro Colón and the full house was like cheering us in a tango. It was really something special and a very emotional moment, I find.
With so many concerts behind you, we can say that you are going home to Hungary. What experiences do you have with the Hungarian musicians in general?
Performing with artists from a different country, from a different culture, different language, is revisiting my whole preconception of music. And what I learned is what I learned, but is not the truth. and still at age 50 plus, I'm learning a lot from collaborations. I think the composers, when they compose, when they write music, they organize their phrasing, not just by musical rules, but also the way the sentence makes sense grammatically in their own language. So therefore the structure of the thoughts and the development thereof will be different, say in Hungarian, in Russian, in French, in German, or in English, for example, because the organization of the sentence, just simply where you put the verb, where is the action, how is the setup, is the subject in the beginning or in the end, all these kind of things are different in all these languages. Plus, in Slavic languages, all the possibility of declinations so many times of the same word that becomes a different rhythm, a different melody. This explains a lot of what is going on in music from different origins. And when I play with Hungarian musicians, I see there is an ownership of mitteleuropäische Musik, of music from former Austro-Hungarian Empire, of course, but just the cultural exchange and the connection there is also with other Romanian folk melody and the incredible amount of culture that meets here in Hungary. But the solution is brought very personally, I must say, and sometimes in different ways by Hungarian musicians in a way that I find exemplary. And this is really something that every time I'm fascinated with.
And what about Hungarian composers? For example, some years ago you recorded a CD with András Adorján with the pieces of the Doppler brothers.
Yeah, the Doppler brothers, of course, I think came from Transylvania or something like that. So they're just at the border, southern border of what is now the territories of Romania and Hungary. And then later on developed their career, one more in Vienna and the other one more in, I think was in, not in Mannheim, but in that area, and were not only successful as virtuoso flute players, but also as conductors, as arrangers, etc. So a very rich life as musicians. There are some documents that András Adorján showed me about them. Yeah, the congratulations letter from Brahms, for example, to one of the brothers. So Franz and Albert were just really having fun writing this music, and yeah, again the accentuation of the sentence of the word. Because of the folk roots of this music is something quite specific and something that when we learn this in a more Germanic or French tradition or British, we're not so careful about. We're careful about the singing of a melody and about the rhythmical character of other passages, but then the actual accentuation and rhythm of the phrase is something so definitely Hungarian and is something where we have been also developing on this project. And the interesting thing is that some of it was already famous repertoire, but in previously unpublished versions of this, for example, sonata for two flutes, and piano, that was where there was some bits of the piano part missing, but the one part of the flute is known as another piece in another movement and another piece in another movement. Therefore it was interesting to see how this fits together as a larger composition with more interaction and the improvisation comments of one flute to the other one reacting, and how incredibly fast and like jazz improvisation or folk musicians are doing, but written out in a way that is just marvelous, because it allows us, with a distance in the time, to witness how this music can be just like invented from scratch.
You play a lot of concerts during the year. Moreover, not only in Demand as a soloist, interpreter of concertos and chamber works, but also as a member of the Berliner Philharmoniker, not to mention the masterclasses you give. How can all this be reconciled in space and time, and where does your energy come from?
Well, I'm lucky to be relatively healthy, actually, and do not have to make pauses because of exhaustion, or I've never had nervous or breakdowns or burnout syndromes, because I'm careful about how the stamina is used in one or the other context. And I was lucky to grow from my studies onwards. When I was 19, while I was still in the Paris Conservatory, I had won some international competitions. I also got the first job at the part-time in the Basel Radio Symphony Orchestra. So I started commuting while finishing my studies and starting the job, and then I moved to 100%, but still I had some solo engagements because of winning some competitions. And then I founded the Chamber Music Festival also after finishing my diplomas there with this. So I've been growing in all these different fields of activities simultaneously, and this hasn't changed, this hasn't stopped, and I'm still with appetite looking forward to what life is bringing to me. What is newer in the last over 15 years, nearly 20 years now, is the commissioning of pieces of music, concertos written for me, but also solo pieces, also chamber music or more recital pieces, depending on the collaboration with composers. And this is something that brought me closer, funnily, to old-time composers also. Like working with living composers, you approach music differently, not from the point of view of the performer, but of the creator. And therefore, it has given me the keys of reading certain things that I took for granted in Bach or in Mozart, for example, or in Schubert, differently in the light of how composers approach the music. So I find this an incredibly enriching experience.
In such cases, you work together on the piece. For example, if the composer is not a flutist himself or herself, yeah?
I have the utmost respect for the composer, and I believe that they have a project, a process of writing, of turning a white page into something full of scribbling and full of text in the end. And there's a message there. So my mission is to give shape to this text and bring the message live on stage, if you want. I tend not to interfere too much with the composers in order not to shrink their ideas to a tailor-made kind of suit. I prefer to let them go with their creativity. And of course I say, if you have doubts about the use of the instrument or whatever.
What is possible, what is not possible.
Or, exactly. Let's check what is possible, what is not possible. But if it's not possible for me, then it's a challenge. I'm happy to work on it. And if I can't do it, somebody in the next generation will find a solution. I'm pretty sure. If something is really unplayable, then maybe we will think about readapting. And actually a few composers have, after the first set of performances, readapted, like for a large orchestra into a smaller orchestra, or the contrary, expanded the range of colors depending on their impression in the collaboration together in that first week. So, yeah, the creativity, I think, should be without boundary. And this is where I'd like to be supportive to the composer rather than telling them, please make it comfortable for me.
I see. There is a great tradition of flute and the flute players in France. We can mention the great Jean-Pierre Rampal and your teacher Aurel Nicolet as well. What are the workshop secrets of this tradition? Can we talk about a French flute school, a French method? And what is the essence of it?
Well, one of the secrets is practice. It's not so much of a secret actually, but practice is the only moment of intimacy that you have with yourself. It's the only moment where you can be totally shameless, try out everything to make it work the way you would like to hear it, basically, you know. And with this in mind, the technical approach, the French flute school has a lot of books and scales that were written when the Böhm flute in the middle end of the 19th century was adopted in France. So the books by Taffanel and Gobert and then later on by Moïse in the early 20th century are a constituent of the French flute school, so to say, of the second French flute school. The first flute school was the Vienne in the French Revolution at the founding of the Conservatory. And this has spread all around the world because all the English flute players like James Galway, but also William Bennett and their Trevor Wye and their teacher Geoffrey Gilbert, all of them had been studying in Paris Conservatoire. So they had a different sound approach that is a signature of the English flute school. And they were using old French instruments till today. The French don't have one sound concept. What they do is a lot of virtuosity for the fingers, for the technique, for the articulation. It comes naturally with the language because it's a good predisposition with a U sound, for example, to a great support for a nice, delicate and vibrant higher octave, for example, and precise articulations also in whichever range.
Again, the language.
The language is determining a lot in that thing. All these books have been translated in any kind of language of the world. So the French flute school has now spread as a standard all around the world. It's taught in slightly different interpretations, but that's basically now how you learn how to play the flute. Again, the sound approach, there is no such thing. I was stunned in the Paris Conservatoire how different people would sound, the students, and how the teachers were not at all insisting on this. This is more a Germanic thing because of the orchestral approach of or the chamber music, or the playing in a set, basically, approach of the instrumental mastery. It's more soloistic and pure instrumental approach in France, and this is what is so distinctive in the end about it. But I must say, particularly like talking about Hungary, for example, the amount of incredible virtuosos with the incredible tonguing that come from here, or other people with amazing sound also. There are generations of great flute players here, great virtuosos and very expressive players, all very different also. So there must be something genetically special also coming from Hungary.
I read on your website that the Berliner Philharmoniker, I quote, became a very individualistic and soloistic large ensemble. And given that you play a lot of chamber music, I'm wondering what this chamber music mindset really means, and what does chamber music mean to you in general?
Well, Berlin Philharmonic is indeed, once the conductor has given the first upbeat, is an extremely large chamber music group. It has a lot of soloistic individualities also that know how to blend together also the next sentence or the next musical phrase. In these proportion of how much they are able, or we are able to play solistically, or chamber music-like, or as an orchestra, as a discipline or versatile orchestra, depending on who is conducting, whether it's a specialist from the Baroque period or from contemporary music or whatever, is something quite unique at this level of quality. And this is why I find it fascinating for me still after so many years, 30 years more or less, to still be playing there as an orchestral member, and it's very enriching, alternating this with my soloistic life. A lot of the musicians like Principal Horn, Stefan Dor, Cor Anglais, Dominique Wollenweber, clarinet, Wenzel Fuchs, Albrecht Meyer next to me in the oboe, Principal Cellist, Principal Double Bass, etc. Harp, we all joined the same year. So we were on trial together, and we did a lot of young musician chamber music projects because Abado was supporting a lot of these kind of things in those years. So we really grew up together as a generation, both in the orchestra and also outside the orchestra, and do a lot of projects, whether as soloists, concertante, or chamber music recital, or inside the orchestra. Some other members, like the current Principal Viola, Principal Cello, Concertmeister, etc., I knew them from before the orchestra, and through my chamber music festival they played with us, and we grew up together in this way. So you see, it's a handing over of several ways of tradition, and there's other people who studied together, who are students of each other. It's a very rich musical life, and since Berlin is now open, of course it's a very different story since 1989 than it was before. Of course it has had the very phases that were determined by the history of this city that still displays its open wounds when you go there. And it's half and half German in an international orchestra now. And I think in the collaboration mostly with Kirill Petrenko, we really bring a very strong focus every week on the program that we bring together and try to bring it to a kind of epitome on every project.
And let me ask a last question, again in connection with the France Liszt Chamber Orchestra, which celebrates its 60th anniversary. What do you wish them for their birthday?
Well, it's amazing to see how youthful the France Liszt Chamber Orchestra is for a 60 years old institution, so to say. No, the imprint, the impact of Franz Liszt Chamber Orchestra in the musical landscape has been so strong over decades now. It's really something to be proud of. And of course, most of the musicians playing together today are part of this evolving tradition now and feel responsible for the achievement of the previous generation in a way. And this pride and this attitude, the display of intensity in the work, together with the string school virtuosity, is something that is wonderful under the leadership now of Peter Tvirsten and in the special collaboration with István Vardai. Also, it's something really to be proud of, I think, for many more decades. So I hope that we can celebrate many more anniversaries like this, together musically, but also I'm wishing that the Franz Liszt Chamber Orchestra so many great success in this celebration. I hear there's other projects such as Beethoven Symphony is also happening. So the expansion of repertoire is something that is very much on the agenda right now, and I think it's a great way to celebrate with this great music.
Many, many thanks for your inspiring thoughts, and thank you again for accepting our invitation to this talk, and good luck with your next concerts and all your future plans. Thank you again.
Thanks so much.
Bátran állíthatom, hogy egy izgalmas beszélgetésen vagyunk túl. Remélem önök is így gondolják, engem nagyon inspiráltak Emmanuel Pahud gondolatai, és tartsanak velünk a következő alkalommal is, a következő videós podcastra, és természetesen a következő koncertjeinkre is várjuk önöket nagy szeretettel. Az információkért kövessék honlapunkat, YouTube csatornánkat, valamint Facebook és Instagram oldalainkat.